All right, let's talk about G.K. Chesterton. This is a man so full of brilliant contradictions that people called him the Prince of Paradox. He was an absolute giant of literature, a philosophical fighter, and honestly, one of the most fun and influential writers of the entire 20th century.
You know, to really get Chesterton, you have to start with one of his signature paradoxes, like this one. At first, it feels totally backward, right? But just think about it for a second. A telescope, it conquers these huge distances, making the universe feel kind of smaller, like we've got a handle on it. But a microscope? It takes one tiny little thing you'd normally ignore and reveals a whole massive universe inside it. And that's the genius of it. He's saying true wonder isn't about conquering the big things, it's about exploring the small. This kind of thinking that flips everything on its head, that was his trademark.
So, who was this guy? Was he a journalist? A novelist who dreamed up one of fiction's greatest detectives? A theologian? Well, the answer is yes. He was all of them. He wrote fantasy, he wrote poetry, and he wrote some of the most powerful arguments for the Christian faith ever put to paper. And that's the big puzzle we're looking at. How do you even begin to define a man who seemed to be everything all at once?
Okay, so to get a real grip on his writing, you first have to understand the man himself. And believe me, he was a character, in every single sense of the word.
I mean, he was, quite literally, a larger-than-life figure. We're talking 6'4", nearly 300 pounds. You just couldn't miss him, walking around in his signature cape and crumpled hat, often carrying a sword stick, and he was famously, almost comically, absent-minded. There's this legendary story where he sends a telegram to his wife that just says, "Am in Market Harborough. Where ought I to be?" Her reply? Brilliant. Just one word. Home.
And this incredible wit was just always on. His debates, even his friendships, were packed with this kind of sharp, good-natured humor. I mean, just look at this classic exchange with his great friend and intellectual rival, George Bernard Shaw, who was as skinny as a rail. This wasn't mean-spirited stuff. It was like a sport for two of the greatest minds of the time.
But underneath that witty, whimsical surface, there was a man on a really profound spiritual quest. It's a journey that actually started in a pretty dark place, and it would end up defining his entire life's work.
This timeline here shows a pretty remarkable path. As a young man, Chesterton was messing around with the occult and really struggling with some deep, dark despair. But his journey through all that doubt didn't make him an atheist. It actually led him straight back to faith. You can see the big turning points. First, he publishes Heretics, and then, in 1908, he writes Orthodoxy, where he basically says that Christianity isn't a prison, it's the key that unlocks the entire universe. This whole long journey finally led him, in 1922, to be formally received into the Catholic Church.
Now, a ton of his most famous writing falls under this umbrella, Christian apologetics. And let's be super clear about what that means. It's not about apologizing for your beliefs. It's the intellectual tradition of making a reasoned, logical case for your beliefs. And Chesterton, he became one of its most imaginative and powerful champions.
So his conversion, this wasn't just some personal milestone for him. It really became the master key that unlocks the deeper meaning in almost all of his creative work.
For Chesterton, faith wasn't just a part of his life. It became the very lens he used to see everything: history, politics, art, and especially the messy complexities of human nature.
And there is no better example of this than his famous detective, Father Brown. Just compare him to Sherlock Holmes for a minute. Holmes solves crimes with science and external clues, footprints, cigar ash. He works from the outside in. But Father Brown, he solves crimes through empathy and a kind of spiritual intuition. He understands the criminal's heart, so he works from the inside out. It's a totally different approach.
So how does he get inside a criminal's head? This quote, which sounds pretty shocking, is the absolute key. He doesn't mean he's literally a murderer. What he means is that his Catholic understanding of original sin tells him that the capacity for terrible evil exists in every single human heart, including his own. And by knowing that darkness is inside himself, he can truly understand what drives someone else to commit a crime.
This whole worldview arguably hit its peak in what many call his masterpiece, The Everlasting Man. It was written as a direct response to H.G. Wells' famous book, The Outline of History, which basically treated Jesus as just another historical figure. Chesterton's counter-argument was, no way. He argued that Christ is the central, most important, singular event in all of human history. And to make his case, he said that all of pagan mythology and ancient philosophy was really just humanity's deep, unconscious search for the truth that Christianity would finally reveal.
So, what is the lasting impact of this intellectual giant? Well,
As you'd probably expect, it's just as big and surprising as the man himself. First of all, just think about the sheer volume of his work. In his lifetime, he wrote something like 80 books, hundreds of poems, 200 short stories, and get this, over 4,000 essays, most of them on a weekly deadline. The energy is just staggering to think about. And his influence, it just spread to the most unexpected people and places. Mahatma Gandhi was so impressed by Chesterton's critique of materialism that he actually reprinted one of his essays. C.S. Lewis gave The Everlasting Man huge credit for helping him finally embrace Christianity. And even modern authors like Neil Gaiman and Jorge Luis Borges have pointed to him as a major influence. I mean, his ideas just crossed every political, religious, and artistic line you can imagine.
Which leaves us with one final, and maybe the most provocative, paradox of all. A few years back, the Catholic Church actually opened an investigation into whether Chesterton could be made a saint. Now that process has been paused for now, but the question still hangs in the air. Could this cigar-smoking, larger-than-life journalist, this lover of good arguments and good jokes, one day be known as Saint G.K. Chesterton? It's really the ultimate testament to a man whose life and work are still challenging, inspiring, and confounding us all these years later.